Thank you, Lee.
Goedendag, ik heet Lee Najim, aangenaam. So a couple of SDGs that are particularly relevant for me. Personally, climate action, climate change, that's one that I've been especially interested in, both through kind of personal contributions and then from a business perspective. Professionally, I do a lot with consumption, production, making sure that we're being responsible in our business operations. Thankfully, I've been able to work a lot with that in my current role at my business, which is Siemens Health and Ears. I'm a project manager in transportation there, do a lot of work with setting different policies globally for how we move our products A to B. My SDG question that I have is, which businesses are current leaders at balancing SDG dilemmas? So I've seen a lot of businesses have started to take a much more serious approach, hiring chief sustainability officers, et cetera. We just did the same this year. So I'm just curious which ones are leading the pack in that regard. International experience, not a ton of physical travel, but I do have near daily interaction with teams all over from APAC, Latin America, EMEA, all over. Nature of what I do primarily is export. So I get to deal with a lot of people from different cultures constantly. And then a brief trip to Germany with the military. It feels like ages ago now. Something unique about me is I've actually served as a juror on a murder trial here locally in Indianapolis about 3 or 4 years ago. So I got to call up and do my civic duty, and I was one out of, 150 that day who got to sit on the panel. And personally, I have 2 kids, ages 6 and 1, and in my spare time, I get them involved a lot through my hobbies, which are amateur strength training and competitions, and I spend a lot of time outdoors with them.
Great. Thank you, Lee.
Guten Tag, ich heiße Lori Miller, Ankenam. I have a bachelor's and master's in chemistry from Bucknell University and will be finishing my MBA in May. And I'm really excited to learn and talk to you guys today. So right now I work at Eli Lilly as the publication strategy advisor for our COVID therapeutics. So I work with physicians, our scientists, and US government to ensure that we have our clinical data in the hands of our prescribers to make sure that people can get the treatments they need for COVID. So as part of that job, I'm part of a global team that's mostly based in the United States, Ireland, and India. So I feel like I'm online at weird hours for me all the time to get with my team members. And I've also done a number of global regulatory submissions to get new products on the market across the globe. Something unique about me, I went to boarding school where there was a science teacher who really became a friend and mentor to me, who really set me on the path of loving science and the scientific method and everything to do with science. So that all ties into my business and personal SDGs, good health and well-being. I feel like that's just a big part of my life, whether it's personal or professional. And my question is, how can we get businesses to prioritizing implementing the SDGs in daily work? How do we just get it to be part of the daily conversation instead of an afterthought? Personally, my son Andrew is 17. He's a senior in high school and just put in all of his college applications. So about to enter a new phase of my life. And my partner Rob and I, we actually came down to Florida when the Netherlands trip got canceled. So part of me is excited to be able to have a little bit more flexibility with the kid going off to college. And part of me is just really scared to see him go. And I also enjoy exercise, cycling, reading, and baking.
That's great.
Thank you, Lori. Guten Tag, ik Michael Natowski, Aangenaam. I am a commercial real estate appraiser for a small bank here in Indiana called Centier Bank. I completed my undergraduate at IUPUI with a degree in communications, and I'm currently finishing up my MBA at Butler with a concentration in marketing. My SDGs, the business SDG is SDG 11. This is most relevant to my professional experience and work history. It's something I have a passion for. It's something I've been learning about. It's a very deep and complex SDG, but I'm also very passionate about SDG 1. The more I get to travel and talk to people and learn, ending poverty is such a critical SDG to bring everybody up and being part of teams. You're only as strong as your weakest link, and if we could bring up sort of the weakest in the poverty right now, this is going to help everybody out. My specific question regarding SDG is 11 is I'm trying to determine the most appropriate stakeholders. There's government, there's private industry, there's NGOs, but I'm trying to flush out who exactly are the key stakeholders to push this SDG forward. My international experience is really isolated to Spain. My wife is Spanish. We actually have a house in Alcobendas, which is in the suburbs. Something unique about me, we actually got married in 2020 during COVID in Madrid. So none of my family or friends could attend, unfortunately, which was terribly difficult. So we broadcast it live on YouTube. It's still out there. So if you go to YouTube and search Mike and Elena's wedding, there's actually 2 Mike and Elena's weddings out there. Kind of funny, but you can see we're the one with the dogs, and there's translations in Spanish. So that was actually pretty cool. Personally, we have a son, Lucas. It's 7 weeks old now. He's actually right next to me, so I might be on mute for a little bit till my wife gets home because he may start crying. Other than that, we've got 2 dogs, and we really love to golf, run, spend time outside. So pleasure to meet everybody. Looking forward to your feedback, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Michael.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Guten Tag, ik Cam Lutter. Aangenaam. I graduated with a bachelor's in psychology from Marian University. I'll be completing my MBA here at Butler this December, barring all goes well. So fingers crossed. I'm the e-commerce sales manager at Quest Safety Products. We're a full-line manufacturer and distributor of PPE. So I'm sure we're all have heard the term PPE a lot lately. So we've been very, very busy serving our customers and making sure that they get the products they need to keep their workers and employees safe. For SDGs, my personal SDG is quality education. It's my opinion that in order for most of these SDGs to be the goals to be reached and what we're trying to do, I think everything starts with education. Education is the foundation behind all of that. And then my business SDG is decent work and economic growth. The question I'll be posing today is, how do businesses effectively quantify and track the progress of achieving SDGs? The business I currently work in participates in a program called Hub Zone. It stands for Historically Underutilized Business Zone, and the idea is to put fast-growing companies within low economic developed areas. And so essentially, as the business grows, the community grows. What I've seen with this program, though, is there's a bit of a lack of metrics in how effective we're actually being. Are we doing, we have the certification, but is it really paying off, not just 1 year, but 2 year, 5 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road. International experience, 2 Canadian fishing trips. So that's it right there. Something unique about me is you see in the top left, I played college football at Marian University, and I was lucky enough to be a part of 2 national championship teams. Really, really fun time in my life. Huge family man. That's my brother and my father, or my brothers and my father in the middle picture. And then my mom is the lowest picture there. She is my hero. She's battling stage 4 colorectal cancer right now. So it's just, I'm just grateful to have her still here. Personal, I love spending time with my family. It's probably my favorite thing to do. Love reading, and I'm a huge sports fan. Pretty much anything that involves competition, I can get behind. That's just who I am. And then another just personal narrative. I'm a burn survivor. I was in a severe accident where my apartment exploded due to a natural gas leak, and I was inside. Spent several weeks in the hospital with 30% of my body covered in third-degree burns. So I always put that and never forget that, because I'm just really grateful to be here. Thank you.
Guten Tag, ik Riley. I graduated from IUPUI back in 2013. with a degree in mechanical engineering, as well as a degree from Butler University in chemistry. I came back last year to Butler to complete my MBA, and hopefully I'll be wrapping that up summer of 22. My personal SDG is zero hunger. This one really started to impact me when I started to study this class. My perspective has changed over the last few years. I have a 2-year-old son at home, so I really can't imagine it on a day-to-day basis struggling to understand how I feed my son. So that one really started to impact me. My business SDG that I'll be studying is responsible consumption and production. My SDG question for you guys today would be, how do we sell the business case for a circular economy to short-term oriented companies? So many of these companies are interested in making a dollar today. So how do we sell to them that down the road this will be better off for them? Personal life, I love to travel, run, golf, as Cam said, anything sports. That's kind of where I land as well. I'm married with a 2-year-old son, so you can see a picture of my family up in the top left there, my son Davis and my wife Jordan. And then the bottom left there is back when we were still able to travel before COVID and kids. My wife and I spending time in Amsterdam. We loved our time in the Netherlands. We spent a few weeks there. International experience. Right now, I work for Eli Lilly and Company as a project manager for global facilities delivery. So I help deliver manufacturing sites across the world. Main impacts that I have are in Ireland as well as Puerto Rico, and then here at home in Indianapolis. I've also worked for Shell Oil Company. I worked for about 3 weeks in The Hague and Rijswijk back in 2014, 2015. Really enjoyed my time there. Leisure travel wise, we've tried to go any and everywhere. Been to Italy, Netherlands, as I said, Switzerland, Germany. You can see them all there, and we're hoping to start up travel here soon once COVID lifts. Looking forward to talking to you guys today.
Thanks, Riley.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so. All right. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks a lot for those presentations. I think much appreciated, and very nice to get to know you professionally, but also personally. And I guess we didn't prepare such nice slides, so we'll do that from the screen before we put on our presentation. Well, Robin, do you want to start? I think you've been with the firm longest.
Yeah, that's fine, Tom. Thank you. Thanks for that. And indeed, thanks to you all for doing that nice presentation. I got a smile on my face every time I hear you guys try to pronounce these Dutch words, especially with the hard G, the G. You know, I can imagine it can be tough, but really great effort from all of you. It sounded pretty nice, actually. Let me start off by introducing myself. My name is Robin. I'm a director with PwC. Been with PwC the Netherlands for 14 plus years, and I'm responsible for a large portfolio in the audit or assurance practice of PwC. And I have a master's in economics, and I'm a CPA, or a Dutch CPA. We call it RA in the Netherlands. Yeah, since college, I've joined PwC and stayed here ever since. In the period 2013 to 2015, I actually was on a secondment to PwC US. So I lived in Columbus, Ohio for 2 years. Me and my family moved out there, which is fairly close to Indianapolis, as you guys are aware. Thoroughly enjoyed our time in the US in those 2 years. Did a lot of great things work-wise, but also personal. One of which I guess some of you will appreciate is visiting a Pacers game. And I actually saw Dirk Nowitzki, back then still with the Mavericks, come down and play the Pacers. And that was one of my highlights of those 2 years. And they beat the Pacers. So we were in let's say the hole of the lion, I guess, and I was wearing my Maverick shirt. Yeah, it was a really nice experience in that period. Fun fact, I guess, about me. I was inspired by you guys telling all these personal stories I'm 6'9" and 260 pounds. So I'm a pretty big guy, and I play basketball. And when I give people my height, because people ask me all the time, how tall are you? I say 6'9" and 260 pounds, and it's the same height and weight as LeBron James, is what I say. And then I'd like to think that I'm in the same shape that he's in, but I'm probably not. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I saw LeBron play, actually come back to Ohio when he was with the Heat and joined a Cleveland versus a Heat game, which was pretty hostile, I can tell you. It was fun. Since moving back to the Netherlands, I've been an engagement leader responsible for providing assurance to my clients. So actually auditing financial statements. I have a portfolio of clients mainly in the oil and gas industry, in the chemical industry. So I do a lot in that realm, which obviously, a lot of those companies have to deal with SDGs in a very direct way. Especially as it relates to climate and CO2 emissions and using green energy in their production process. So it's actually a very relevant theme for me as an engagement leader in assurance to help my clients in that process. And I'm actively or more actively involved in that on a day-to-day basis. We deliver assurance on financial statements, but we also do that on non-financial information, and the focus on non-financial information is increasing as we speak. We'll talk more about that in the presentation today. I think that's in a nutshell. Maybe some more about me. I'm married to Diana. I have a wife and one son. His name is Fabian. And we live in a town called Hoogmade here in the Netherlands, which is a pretty small village, 1,500 people in the middle of Dutch cow country. And for those that know the Dutch countryside, it's a lot of windmills, grass, and cow manure, and the smells that go with that, which really make me feel at home. So happy to be here and happy to work through this session. I heard a lot of really great questions from you guys. I'm not sure if I was able to keep track of all of them, but I'm asking Tom that he should have the list and make sure that we answer all, or if not most of those. I would like to make it an interactive session with you guys to make sure that we answer any questions you might have and get you to learn as much as possible.
Thank you, Robin. I wanted to mention, I don't know if you had ever heard of Rick Smits.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so he played for the Pacers, and then his son, Derek.
I heard his son is coming up now. Is that true?
Yes, his son played his final year of college at Butler University.
Oh.
And he was an MBA student, so he did his final year of eligibility with us.
Kid. Great kid.
And he's a 7-footer, is he?
Yeah, he is. He's a 7-footer. So we always start the year with what we call a gateway challenge, where people use building blocks. And, you try to build this tallest tower of building blocks. Obviously, his team won.
Yeah, Heidi, I was in that class, and he had to pop out a ceiling tile so he could go higher. I wasn't happy about that.
I was on his team, so I was very appreciative.
Yeah, those of us on the other teams were not impressed.
I just kind of stood back and let him do him. It was great.
Awesome.
And Robin, certainly we have plenty of cows and fields in Indiana. We certainly have the fresh smell of manure when we cruise the countryside. So come on over to Indiana. We're welcome. We're happy to see you. Our windmills, though, are we do have windmills. They're just more the electric variety.
There you go. Yep, the SDG variant. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. I guess over to Tom, or?
Yes, shall I go next? So I'm Tom. I live in Amsterdam. I also grew up in the countryside in the southeast of the Netherlands, where I sort of developed a passion for horses and riding. So I was lucky enough to have a pony when I was younger, and then finished high school, and I wanted to be a professional dressage rider. So I did that actually for 8 years. I worked for one of our Olympic team riders, and after that I had my own business in which I was training and selling horses. And then at a certain point I felt that I couldn't combine my passion and my love for horses with the commercial aspects of it. So went to university and studied business economics and joined PwC. So that was quite a career turnaround. From riding 12 horses a day to making PowerPoint presentations. Well, I joined our consulting practice at first, where I mainly did projects for financial institutions in the Netherlands, and then started focusing on sustainable finance, and then eventually transferred to our corporate sustainability team. So the team I work in now is responsible for or drives our activities around the SDGs, for example, and how we embed those in our business operations, but also in our client services and in the contribution that our people have to the SDGs. Well, we'll talk more about that in the presentation that we prepared, and I think we can answer most of your questions. My SDG, maybe that's that one I can answer now. So personally, I think quality education is very important. I do volunteering work for a foundation who provides for school fees for kids in an orphanage in Nairobi, and I think that's a great way to. It's an SDG which, as you said, I think Sharia impacts all the other ones. So that's a great way to make an impact. I think professionally, I'm getting more and more interested in the biodiversity-related SDGs because of the interaction effect that you see, not only with climate change and the interaction between ecological systems and the devastating effects that climate change is causing, but also the economic effects and how dependent we are on these ecosystems for many of our activities. So that's something that we're also professionally exploring at PwC. Yeah, and then personally, my boyfriend and I, we recently got a puppy, so she's running around the house. You might hear her in the background, and if she's nearby, I'll show her to the screen. She loves saying hi. Yeah, I think.
Thanks,
over
Tom.
you. Welcome.
Yeah, you have a beautiful puppy, so nice.
All right, I will introduce myself as well. I will keep it a bit brief for this part because at the end of our agenda, I will also go through my personal career story, so I don't want to duplicate that part. My name is Kylan Wentz, and I'm a senior manager here at PwC. I've been at the Netherlands now 5 years this month. I can't believe how quickly that time has flown. I'm originally from Pennsylvania. Also grew up in the suburbs, went to school in Fairfield University. Normally I don't mention that to the Dutch because I don't think they normally know where that is, but it's in Connecticut. So at least now I feel like I'm among peers and colleagues who know where that is. And I guess a fun fact about me is even though I grew up in Pennsylvania, I worked in New York, in the New York metro area, Connecticut, in New York, and I lived in Brooklyn for a bit, and I would actually bike from where I lived in Brooklyn, Bay Ridge, all the way to the Manhattan office. I was the same time as the subway, 2 minutes shorter or faster. No, yeah, shorter. But I felt like it was easier to bike than to be on the subway with people. And that was 11 miles each way or 22 kilometers. So when I moved to the Netherlands, if you guys haven't been, they have these amazing bike paths that it just felt quite special to be able to bike to work and not be weaving in and out of taxis. So I felt like I was actually safer here, and I couldn't believe that's what I put my life in jeopardy, biking through taxis in New York. So I will never do that again, but very happy to be in the Netherlands. I guess if I was to think about SDGs, personally, I really do like both the biodiversity SDG as well as poverty. With PwC in the US, I had the ability to teach a financial literacy program in Belize. And I think that was really nice to kind of educate people on that, just on financial literacy and hopefully get them out of poverty. And of course, there's many other aspects to that. And then biodiversity. I just love animals, and one of my hobbies is to scuba dive. And I was able to go to Jordan, and there they actually, we went to this one scuba shop that was really focused on cleaning up the waste as well in the oceans. So that was nice because it's just terrible to see the pictures of, you know, sea turtles wrapped in plastic. So I would kind of say those two are important to me. Of course, all of them are, but those two have more of a focus. But I think I'll keep it to that semi-short introduction, since you'll hear more from me a bit later on my journey. And it's really nice to hear all about you. So nice to meet you all virtually as well.
Thank you, Kylan.
That was really interesting, Kylan.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm going to confess something here. I just discovered something when I went up to more actions, 3 dots on the Teams. And when you go down, I clicked on together mode. Don't know if any of you have ever tried it, but it puts everybody into stadium seating. So that's probably what my recording will show.
It's okay.
I think I like it. It actually, and Robin, you look perfect. Like the way that you're leaning in, it's like you're perfectly seated on the chair. You know, Kyle, it's really interesting how everybody's seated in there pretty nicely. But it is a fun view, so you can feel free to join me.
Okay.
So Robin, I think, shall I put our slides on the screen and shall we get started then?
I think that's a good idea. So we have prepared slides for you guys, which are we're supposed to be pretty interactive. And as I said at the beginning, I want to provide as much opportunity for Q&A as possible. We do have some breaks in between, but also we'll pause for questions or Q&A in between some of the slides to ensure that we maximize the time that we spend together and make it most effective. Hopefully, Tom, you're able to. I only see you now. I don't see a slide.
I am looking for, there should be an option for us to share sound as well. And that doesn't seem to be working while I'm wearing my AirPods. So I'm trying to figure it out. Just give me a second.
Okay.
Can you hear me now? Or?
Yeah, can hear you.
Yes, now it should be working with sound. So we can play the films that we prepared.
Yeah. Yeah, so we indeed have also some video content in here, which always makes it nice. So what we are going to talk about is the 3 of us are going to take you through the various aspects of, I guess, PwC and the SDGs. We're trying to give you an impression of what's going on in Europe as it relates to this topic, but also talk about what PwC as a firm is doing and interlay that with a bit of a personal story, I guess, with that. So, Tom, if we go to the next slides, I think it's important. Yeah, the next one, please. Yeah, so here we have the agenda. So we did the introductions. I'm going to talk about PwC and its global strategy. And the next slide gives us a bit of a picture of that. And I think talking about our global strategy that was recently launched in June, is going to give everyone, I think, a good picture of how we as a firm, I guess, responded to everything that's going on in the world, and and maybe gives a good sort of general outline of how we drill down into the specifics of SDGs and how we deal with that with our client base. So we've launched a new global strategy in June, which is called the New Equation. Some of you might have seen that come through the news and or maybe through other channels. This new strategy focuses on helping clients build trust and deliver sustained outcomes. Those are the two key pillars of the strategy. And as part of that strategy, PwC is making substantial investments to further enhance quality, but also expand our capabilities. And as I said, the strategy responds to the fundamental changes we've seen in the world. Obviously, the pandemic happening, but also technological disruption, climate change, fractured geopolitics, and the continuing effects of the pandemic that we see continue, I guess, in these months and in this year. They have a huge impact on the external environment, which our clients operate in, and you guys also see in your roles within your companies. I like to think of it as, if I put it in relation to the accounting profession or the audit profession, for myself, we're living in a world where uncertainty is increasing, and there's an increasing demand for assurance or certainty or trust. And people nowadays, if I put it frankly, most people don't even know what to believe anymore, and things they hear in the news or information that comes at them. With everything that's going on, everyone's looking for truth. And I guess intrinsically as humans, I think we do that. We look for truth. And in my role as an auditor or external auditor accountant, I provide assurance to society as it relates to the representations or the accounting of companies on their financial statements, but also on their non-financial information. And so in that venue, as it relates to the search for truth and the assurance that people are increasingly demanding for that, the firm has really shifted its focus from being a professional financial services firm to being a trust provider. And as I said, we focus on two fundamental and interconnected needs that are confronting our clients in the coming years. And the first one is the need to build trust. This has never been more important nor more difficult. Organizations increasingly need to earn trust across a wide range of topics that are important to their stakeholders. I saw some of the questions come through on how do we make companies focus, or organizations focus on the longer term versus the short term money making. Well, I think stakeholders in general, but also shareholders as it relates to companies, are becoming more and more, I would say, interested, but also focused on sustained outcomes. And giving those stakeholders that trust is what is going to drive companies in the coming years. The success in this depends on the way the executives think and fundamental shifts in organizational culture, systems, but also their ambitions, which could be different from company to company. Now, the other key focus and fundamental need is the need to deliver sustained outcomes in an environment where competition and the risk of disruption is more intense, and more intense than ever, I would say. And their societal expectations, they've never been greater. So businesses need to change faster, more thoroughly to attract capital, talent, but also customers. And the past year and a half has definitely shown that as well. I have examples of clients that are currently part of my portfolio and have acquired debt or new financing, which is actually sustainability linked financing. So actually really have to comply in the next couple of years with their key KPIs on sustainability, in this case being CO2 emissions and also the usage of green energy. And that financing actually has a structure in place where the interest rate on that financing goes up year over year if they don't meet their yearly targets on these two metrics.
Oh.
It's actually going to cost the company money if they don't invest and prioritize meeting these KPIs. Now, with that, there's also interesting development. The financing parties require assurance to be provided. And so there's an external auditor, in this case, myself, that needs to audit those KPIs or metrics and give assurance to these stakeholders on whether or not the company actually has met those goals. Now, Kaylin is going to take us through some of the developments as it relates to these developments, but also the regulatory environment that relates to that. But this is I wanted to share this example of one of my clients that is actually really coming to fruition on that front. The strategy that PwC has is based on an analysis of global trends. So we did a lot of research. We had thousands of conversations with clients and other stakeholders. And it sort of builds on more than a decade of sustained revenue growth and continued investment that we've been doing over that period of time. And I think it's going to help PwC develop in the coming years as we seek to deliver against our purpose. So we designed our purpose a couple of years back, which is to build trust and solve important problems. Now that trust topic, I think, fits in well with the ESG goals or the DSGs and what society is expecting. But then the question is, how do we deliver on that? And that's going to be crystallized in the next coming years as we venture on this new strategy. And we do have to extend our capabilities to meet these challenges. So, for example, extending on our expertise in ESG. So we're heavily vested in investing in that expertise. And Tom and Kaylin are prime examples of that. But also the non-financial metrics and reporting on that. But cybersecurity is also an area where we heavily invest. Now, if I think about, I told you guys a little bit about one of my clients having that sustainability linked financing. If I think about a real life example on delivering or performing on the sustained outcomes as part of that strategy, and maybe Tom, you can flip to the next slide or the one after that. If I think about that strategy and delivering on that, oh, that's the video. Can you hold the video for a sec? It seems to be working. Yeah, this one. So if I think about that strategy and us delivering or helping our clients delivering on sustained outcomes, an example I recently dealt with is, I think, a good example for that. So I have a client that is a chemical producing company. So they have a large factory out here in the Netherlands, large chemical plant. And they've always been doing well. Business has been going well. But lo and behold, due to COVID and the pandemic, they've seen a drastic decline in revenue over the past year and a half. Now, the Dutch government actually issued rules and a decree about issuing Dutch government grants to sustain jobs. So to ensure that people retain their jobs. Job retention is a direct measure against the impacts of this pandemic. With that granting of subsidies, which this client of mine has applied for, an audit report is designed to be reported on that. So I had to perform, and my team had to perform audit work specifically on the protocol, in line with the protocol, on the rules and the laws that were put in place as it relates to this Dutch government grant. Now, you might think, okay, so fine, there's a subsidy, they can make use of it if they meet the criteria, should be easy auditing and should be easy, let's say, easy work to do. It was actually pretty complex. And what was interesting about this piece of work that we as a firm delivered. We're obviously providing assurance to the Dutch government, if you will, or the organization that is a subset of the Dutch government. And basically, I was, by putting my signature on that, saying I audited this information, and yes, they met all the criteria, and they should be granted this amount of subsidy. As part of that work, we made the client, in this case, aware of the fact that, yes, even though they met, based on the circumstances, they met all the criteria to apply for the subsidy. In essence, they had so much cash that they didn't really need it. So there was this sort of moral debate going on, to which our Dutch Minister of Finance also put out a decree and said, hey, any company that applied for this and has received it should really, balance sort of their decision making, and make sure that if they applied for the money, they actually really need it to perform that job retention. Now, as an external accountant, technically, I'm not responsible for reporting on this moral plea to the stakeholders, but I did raise it internally as a topic that I felt I needed to raise because of my responsibility to society as an auditor. And essentially, it's tax euros that are being used to support the companies and ensure that they can continue with their activities and people keep their jobs. But if I know for a fact, based on my experience, that this company had sufficient cash to be able to survive, I felt I should do something. So I raised it internally, but I also raised it with the company. And because I was able to speak up and I guess in hindsight, focusing on, performing or delivering on the sustained outcomes, was able to convince the client to not apply for the full amount, but apply for a lower amount of subsidy. And actually by doing that, creating more value from a broader societal perspective, and ensuring that the client also from a trust perspective did not amount, which also looks better in their overall representation on their financial statements. So I think in that regard, it's a good example of how we could think differently, but it starts with us, right? It starts with the people that do it, and being mindful of being aware of the consequences of certain actions, and making other people aware of the same situation or the same mindset, to have them potentially come to different conclusions than they initially wanted to come to. So I think the lesson learned from that is that I have a responsibility in this towards society as an external auditor, and me providing assurance, but it's also the company's responsibility. I think that's a really good thing to note. And in the way they act and operate, more and more being focused on the longer term sustainable outcome versus the shorter term cash generation. And by openly communicating on this matter, I think it provided for that more sustainable outcome. So I guess I'll pause there, and maybe Tom, as we think about the new equation and PwC strategy, we can go for the video, and maybe take any questions after that.
I can put the video on screen and hope the sound works for all of you.
Are you saying we cannot do the video, Tom? You want to try it?
We're taught that 1 + 1 = 2. But today's world isn't simple. So, what happens if we look at it from a new angle? Could we make something greater? If we bring together human ingenuity, passion, and experience with the latest technology, we start to make something more something we can see in people's lives and feel in the world around them. Building trust for today and tomorrow. And that's the thing. We all know the math. But we need a new way to put it together. Which means we don't just find answers. We never stop looking for them. A passionate community of solvers, coming together in unexpected ways, creating new solutions for a new day.
I hope that came across well. I was able to follow. I hope you guys as well. The sound wasn't perfect, but I heard the sound of that baby. Did you guys hear that?
Yes.
That is a pretty unique sound, and it made me think of something that happened this morning. My sister actually gave birth to a baby girl this morning.
Congratulations. Oh my.
Yeah, her name is Riva Maria. So we're very excited about that. I'm gonna visit her soon, hopefully. But yeah, obviously the baby in the video also has a message, right? What are we thinking about when we think about our future and the future of our kids as we deal with SDGs? So I think making sort of a moral plea to everyone to think differently and think about the next generations. It also helps me to frame it in that way. And I think one of the questions that our chairman of the board asked us to think about was, what will I do differently? What will you do differently? And I asked people around the office here that same question. And not everyone has a perfect answer, but if maybe consciously or unconsciously you think about how you perform your work, and yes, we could be focused on sort of the short term. I could have gone the easy route as we were auditing this NOW subsidy for that particular client, made all our lives a bit easier. But by acting differently and making the client aware of potential outcomes or more sustained outcomes, I think that's where it starts. And so changing one or two things in the day-to-day things that you do, ask yourself that question, what will I do differently, is going to help us drive, as leaders in companies, help us drive the change as we focus towards these new goals that we're seeing. So I think that's where I'd like to end my introduction, Tom. I don't know if this is the place to maybe react or have questions, but more than happy to take them.
I'm wondering, Riley, does that answer one of your questions that you had about SDGs?
Yes. Yeah, that was a direct answer, actually, so it's perfect.
Lee, what are your thoughts on this? I know you're thinking about this as a potential pivot in your career. Lee, did you hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. You're all set.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me. That's one of the things that I'm looking to get out of this week, especially through our conversations, is just understanding what kind of actions are currently outstanding out there, and understanding in some cases that can be a kind of a strategic advantage. But it is interesting to hear kind of the dilemmas that have come up, especially from like a third-party auditor perspective, how that kind of interaction is going, and hopefully I'll find myself in some of those discussions here eventually in my own organization. So.
Yeah, and maybe a reaction to that. So I was a skeptic maybe I guess 5 years ago, always felt that sustainability, that part of our business, was sort of the softer side of the business. You know what I mean? But and I do see a shift in the regulatory environment, which is driving some of the change, right? So I know banks are bound by regulation, and that's why they also now provide financing that is linked to actually meeting sustainable goals. We see that even in mortgages when people buy houses. If you want to invest in your house and make it greener, then your interest rate is lower as compared to a different mortgage, and that's even on a personal level. But companies now more and more, and especially banks in Europe, are really focused on the sustainable financing. And so that's a lot of what the regulation is driving for banks, is driving what banks are doing in the marketplace, and is making companies rethink or reshift. So without sounding too skeptical, I do think that financial incentive plays a big part in this change, and it will continue to do so.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think for me, that what I've seen is this can come from a couple different places, but it's something that we've seen for decades, that businesses generally don't autonomously take this on very frequently. There's a couple examples out there, but usually it's got to be incentivized by either one of two, either some kind of regulatory action or some kind of public perception or change in opinion that becomes expeditious to the business itself. And both of those really impact the bottom line, right? Yep. So, and the regulatory piece can happen through public perception. And I think we're finally getting to the point where we're starting to pick up steam globally. You're starting to get some of these conversations going. You've got, there's the whole Greta Thunberg saga that fired up a lot of people in the United States. And as this starts to become more of a conversation, that pressure will start to happen, and it can really push that button for businesses from both angles. And we're seeing it. It's now a growing career field, and it's a legitimate career field, whereas in the past, this would have just been a cost center. Imagine 30, 40 years going to probably 499 of the Fortune 500 and saying, hey, you should spend money on this. Most of them would just laugh you out the door. But it's been interesting seeing even what the last 3 years have been.
Agreed.
Yeah. I really love the incentive discussion and especially through the financial markets, that the targeting around green energy and green investments. But anyway, I'll also just, Robin, more of an editorial, your example of, at a point when a company has the ability and to take on a bit of a government bailout or support, and even though they don't need it, and we had that during COVID here, a number of government programs were put in place, and thank God for the press, because what we found is it was the biggest companies that went after the bailout money or the support, and the press really kind of said, hey guys, did you really need it? This was intended for small businesses, and they didn't have their paperwork together as quickly as the Fortune 500 did. So and so I love how, in your role as an auditor, that there needs to be somebody that's just carrying the flag for, what's the right thing to do here, and that you start a conversation that might not have started otherwise. And I don't, that's a little different than the straight SDG discussion, but it's about, I like your term, what will I do differently, or how will I act differently? And it's a real important mantra.
I was going to say the same thing. I wrote that down. I'm going to keep it on my desktop here, is what will I do differently? And I reflect back on yesterday's conversation about the roles within an organization. And I remember Kate saying, I work for a small company. I could sort of be that advocate. And I think the same thing. I work for a smaller company, and what can I do differently? Sorry if my connection's bad.
It's good. It's okay.
To give you guys context, Robin and Kylan, I know Tom, we spoke about a little bit. We met with Carola Vedogin from Sustainability University yesterday, and Carola has written a book called The 7 Roles to Create Sustainable Success. And she's also co-founded the organization Sustainability University. And I guess PwC has helped inform some of what she's put into that, because she actually mentioned that she's had several conversations to help inform that. But she talks about like the seven roles that a person can play to create this in an organization. Are you a networker? Are you the instigator, the challenger, and so on? So that's what Michael is referring to.
I'm curious, when you're working with these companies that have KPIs for sustainability associated with their finance rates or anything like that, does their mindset shift? Does it kind of start out, oh, I need to do this because otherwise there's a financial burden, and does it shift to more of a this is for the greater good, or how do you see that evolution?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess it's the thing we're all wondering about. I guess intrinsically as humans, you would feel that you want to do the right things, right? But then how does that I guess, is there any friction with meeting your financial goals as a company, right? You're still a profit-oriented company. You want to maximize
Right.
that profit for shareholders. How do you combine the two? I think having shareholders and stakeholders in a broader sense shift their interest and responsibilities. And this being a prime example of that is helping to drive, I guess, helping to enable companies to really shift their focus as well. It's providing a platform to do that. Now, in this particular case, the company that I audited, they've been investing in going green for a while now, without even having this sustainability-linked financing in place, because they also view that in the long term, that's a more sustainable business model in general. Now, what we're seeing, I don't know what the U.S. market currently is like with utilities, but in Europe, the gas prices are expected to skyrocket. Natural gas, fuel prices, gasoline for cars at the pump are through the roof. So it's also anticipating from a strategic perspective in future developments and how the energy transition will impact the way your business model should operate in order for you to be around in 5 to 10 years time. And that's what I think is sort of the longer term goal that companies should have if they want to be in business, in a profitable business in the next 5 to 10 years. But now with the regulation on financing and the banks and financing parties actually implementing these KPIs, it's sort of enabling these companies to further focus on that and invest in it with a shorter term financial incentive. So I would say it's both.
Mhm.
I think I have kind of a follow-up to that. Whenever you're dealing with, say, like a dilemma with, say, the financial business interest conflicting with a sustainability interest, do you see or are you involved in any kind of quantitative measurement of those two interests against each other, or is it more just qualitative, this is the right kind of thing to do?
I've not seen let's say a direct one-for-one conflict, which is actually quantified in a way that they're comparable. I think there's always some qualitative aspects that you cannot really put a price on as you think about SDGs and where your company should move to. And how do you value that, right? How do you put a value for the long term on some of those? I don't know. But it's all about, I guess, then you come to the discussion of what is the stakeholder value? What is your shareholder value? And is that really now changing from the hard dividends and cash that everyone used to be focused on towards, am I investing my money in a company that is that is here for the longer term and the greater good, I guess. And yeah.
Yeah, I've done some kind of exercises that are measuring of cost versus quality concerns or conditions or a risk associated with it. And, you know, as you said, it's very difficult to quantify those things on a one-for-one basis, if not impossible, and it's completely subjective. But when I think about a model like that and the way that these two things could potentially conflict, not always, but could potentially conflict, is there, you know, has anybody done something that that's created a nice model that there is a widespread consensus on academically, professionally, et cetera? But it's kind of a loaded question as well.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll talk a bit about impact measurement and the different types of models and frameworks available. Actually, PwC in the Netherlands 2 years ago worked for the government to do an analysis of the landscape of tools, frameworks, and instruments for measuring impact. And although their report actually showed the landscape is extremely scattered, but there are some ways to measure impact for different industries. For example, financial services sector has quite good tools to measure impact. And if you look at the academic research done in that field, I think even if you collect all the studies that have been done, it shows actually that there's almost always a positive correlation between ESG performance and the longer term financial performance. So I think a couple of years ago, the question often was, why should we be doing this? Because we're not sure of the financial benefits. Well, now you see that from a risk perspective, even if you don't act on these ESG factors, then you're actually destroying value.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing something in a Harvard Business Review to that point as well, that they're talking about really ESG is what's driving shareholder value. And it's not that the shareholders came to this like, oh, we want to do better. It was really the consumers who were pushing on them and saying, this is what we want. You know, these are our values. We will vote with our dollars by moving to another product line, because if all things are equal and one of them has a better sustainability record, then there are several consumers who will just move there. And I don't know if that's what you've been seeing, Tom, in terms of that ESG metrics and things, is that, but that's sort of what I had read in the literature. And again, I don't know from your perspective on that.
Yeah, and I think we all assumed that these problems wouldn't materialize, but now we see we had huge floodings in the Netherlands over past months, and not only the Netherlands, Germany and Belgium as well. Houses destroyed, businesses destroyed, and we already see that impact all across the world. So now investors are also starting to take that into account into their projections and valuations, and then even if it's not about doing good, it's about doing good for your financials to consider the ESG risks you're exposed to. And that's what Robin said, and what we experience from a corporate sustainability perspective. Ideally, we would say we're purpose-led, values-driven, and we want to do good. And should there be a business case for sustainability, or is it the means to an end or an end in itself? And that's but it really helps us actually that we don't need to have that discussion anymore, because now the financial value of sustainability and ESG is already proving itself.
Yep.
Now, with the clients that you've worked with on sustainability initiatives, do you find that there's a good value proposition in marketing around the steps that they've taken towards sustainability? Does that have a payoff that, you know, if we build awareness of the sustainability initiatives we're taking on, we expect that to create an ROI if people are aware of that?
Sorry, did I understand correctly? If you say that whether there's companies who have been able to build a good business case or value proposition around their sustainability related activities?
Yeah, just essentially, are there companies out there building a marketing strategy around their sustainability successfully?
Yeah, so we've got a brand in the Netherlands, Interface, and their sustainability journey is actually already quite long. They were on the topic very early. They did a great job in engaging all their people and embedding it in their entire organization. And they recently developed and designed and developed the first. They do carpeting and carpet tiles for office buildings. They have the first climate positive carpet tile, and it's their they're so unique in that, and then they have such a first mover advantage that is their brand, and that is what a lot of people think of when they think of Interface, and they keep growing and growing, so they do that really well. And of course, in the Netherlands we have DSM, which was also sort of ahead of the game, a chemicals and biotechnology company, and their leadership team was actually already thinking about these topics while others were still a bit skeptical. And they really managed to position themselves as sustainability leaders. I'm obviously a bit biased because I'm in the sustainability profession, so I tend to think about these examples as success stories, but maybe a little bit from the non-sustainability perspective.
Well, and Tom, the Interface example, it's a Georgia-based company, and we have Interface carpet in our building at Butler. It's they're very for the LEED certified buildings. It's a really important product. And again, I love your story. It's ahead of the curve. But the other part of Lee's question too is, where is it part of it? Could being on ESG or sustainability be a marketing advantage? That we also see it with institutional investors here. That there's so much of the movement in the stock market is groups like the California Pension Fund or TIAA CREF, or the big institutional groups that are moving money around, and that they'll have sustainability in their investment criteria. And so sometimes it's a consumer that's making a product choice, but sometimes it's a more macro group of investors that are saying this is the direction we need to go. But I love how we don't have to make the same case we had to make a decade ago around corporate social responsibility or whatever. Now it's sort of it's becoming more part of the DNA.
Yeah, and there's other, maybe the flip side to that question, I guess. There's success stories, to Tom's point, but I've also seen companies, an example of a company that has gotten some negative press attention because of the fact that this is an energy company that uses coal burning facilities to generate power, and these coal burning facilities are on the books on their financial statements, right? So they have a certain value, and that value basically projects the economic benefits that this plant will generate for the company in the coming years. Now, they've had those in the financials and disclosed appropriately everything related to that, but there was questions from regulators about that because they didn't take into account the Paris Accord, where we say, okay, as of 2030, we need to have reduced CO2 emissions, etc. So lo and behold, an external factor, if you will, has an impact on the way you account for your assets, and the company didn't really think that through, right? So there was a question raised and press attention on that topic, where the company should have taken into account that the economic life of those coal burning power facilities was not 30 years anymore. It's 10 years. And so what does that do for your value? What does that do for the value of your company? They didn't think that through. So companies becoming more and more aware, companies that might not be front runners becoming more and more aware of what these factors are doing to their value chain.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, here in the States, we have entire political platforms built around keeping those types of energy inefficiencies going. So a little bit different situation. And then actually, that reminds me of something that Tom had said that led to a follow-on question for me, which is, I'm not sure how much your client base is more focused on Dutch customers, but do you find culturally with some of the clients that you work on, it's a harder pitch to have them, follow through a sustainability strategy?
Maybe I don't know, Tom, if that's a bridge to some of the information you want to present in the slides and how we deal with that from the sustainability practice. Don't mean to defer the question, but I think there might be interesting insights that come up there. Is that a good segue into that, Tom?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, maybe for now as a short answer, we do see that our clients are at very different phases in this journey. So and also approach it very differently. So I mean, there's a lot of regulations coming in Europe, not only reporting but also on value chain or supply chain due diligence and on human rights, for example. And some of our customers really approach it from a compliance perspective, while others really see that strategic advantage. I've mainly been working on this topic with our Dutch clients and relationships, but maybe we can touch upon sort of those cultural differences later on once I tell my story, and I would be keen to hear from you how that differs from what you're seeing.
Okay.
Sure.
Would it be a good moment for a short break, maybe, before we dive into the SDG part of our presentation?
Sure.
Shall we say back in 10 minutes?
10, okay.
About 5 is fine with me as well. What you usually
10?
do?
Let's do 5. Oh.
5. 5 is good. Yes.
Let's
Okay,
do
great.
5. All right.
Give it 5
minutes. Yep.
I was wondering, how was the sound for the video? Was it not that good?
It felt like it was almost at like a delay for a second, and then it started to break up, but then it was okay again. But like the first few minutes, I think it was, I don't know why the system would be, but like finding its footing. But after that, I think it was fine. But Riley and Lori can probably, what did you guys hear for the video? Was it okay?
It was mostly okay for me. It was a little broken up right in the first few seconds, and then it was fine for me.
Same.
Okay. Good. So we all heard the same thing. I wasn't sure how it was going across. Okay. Yeah, so maybe we just hit play and then rewind or something for our next video.
Yeah.
Maybe that sound will be better for it to load.
Yeah, exactly.
Kylan, you said you grew up in Philadelphia?
Right outside in Mount near Wayne, Pennsylvania. Are you familiar with the area?
A little bit. I used to be at Georgetown, so I was a coxswain, and so I was thrown into the Schuylkill River a lot. So that was as close as I got to most of Pennsylvania. They had big races in the city, so that's.
Oh, so nice to be able to row in the Schuylkill. That was one of the things I always wanted to do. So I picked up a crew actually at Fairfield and finally got to do that as well. Small world. Pardon?
So what seat were you in?
I was bow for my first year, and then second year I moved up to stroke.
Boy, that's quite a change.
Yeah.
Even from the coxswain's position, because the stroke is the one that definitely sets the pace. The
Yeah.
bow is the one that comes in handy when you need to maneuver, but you're sitting dead in the water, right?
Yeah.
You know, bowman or bow. Gosh, what did they say to you in crew? I was men's team.
Honestly, they never said bow man. I think they just always said bow.
Okay.
We never even got the man or woman at the end of it.
I never even thought about it. I lived with all of the women on crew, so I'm only 5'3", but everyone else was much taller, to Robin's point. And so but I never really coxed them, so I didn't compete with them. And so I never even thought about the language that would have been used.
Yeah.
Interesting.
No, that's too funny. I never thought about that until now too. We were always just shouted out, bow, port, starboard.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And Butler has club rowing. They don't have an official rowing team. Like it's not like our basketball or something, but
yeah,
we do have club rowing. So at least there's a little something. And, the National Rowing Association did relocate to Indianapolis back in the 80s.
Did not know that.
Yes, not that we are a hub of rowing. However, we do have the White River, but I believe the tax situation in Indiana was attractive for a nonprofit.
It always comes down to that, right?
And we attract a lot of nonprofits in Indianapolis. Isn't that right, Larry? About the 80s and the 90s, we just had a drove of NCAAs and yeah. Oh, you're muted.
Oh yeah.
You gotta unmute you. You gotta unmute, Larry. Uh-oh. What's happening?
I hope it didn't somehow lock him on mute.
Hope not. I gotta find out what I did. I muted him when we went to break. Now it doesn't allow me to unmute.
I don't know how Teams works, Larry, but sometimes it's like or at least on Google Meets, you have to unmute in 2 spots if you've been muted by someone.
Ah,
I don't know how that works here, but
Kylan.
oh, it looks like you're unmuted.
I think I got it. I think I got it.
I'm glad
Just
we figured this out during the break.
Yeah, no, that's okay. By the way, a quick story about rowing and crew. That the famous race in Boston is called the Head of the Charles Regatta. And so you have all these Ivy League schools with white tablecloths out as and blankets and wine and champagne, and then you have University of Wisconsin with beer. And so it's just this great contrast between I want to call it the Ivy League elites and us Midwesterners that are just very proud of beer and brats, essentially. So.
I love the Head of the Charles. That was fun. Did you ever do the Head of the Charles, Colin?
Yep. And Kylan also like the Lake Quinsigamond at the Eastern Sprints were over in Worcester, Mass. It was a very famous lake up there that you'd have a lot of the Eastern schools just outside Boston. So.
Yeah, it was always nice being able to travel and go to other schools for the competitions.
Yeah, yeah.
So, do you think we have everyone to get back to it? I'm sure we could always talk about beer and sports based on actually everyone's activities here.
Yes. Yeah, I asked everybody to put themselves back on camera when they returned in the chat. I don't know if the students have seen that. So if you're back, could you put yourself on camera so we know that you're back? That includes me. I think maybe they heard the 10 minutes versus the 5.
We're okay.
Do you want to wait a bit more, or shall we get started with the?
I'm trying to see if everybody's in. I've asked them to put themselves on camera when they return, but it is kind of time to start.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Put it on present mode. Yeah. So we wanted to talk about the SDGs, and I was actually planning to bridge the introduction that Robin did to the SDGs and why we are doing this. But I think we covered quite a bit of why the SDGs are important to business. And I think in 2015, when the United Nations adopted the SDGs for our corporate sustainability team at PwC, the question wasn't if we were going to do something with the SDGs. The question was what we were going to do. And now the new equation is all about sustained outcomes, and ESG is a huge part of that. I think back then it wasn't as clear that there was a real business case in ESG and sustainability, not for all of our colleagues at least. So what we did is, and what I'll try to explain a bit, is our SDG journey, and that started actually quite small. But to structure that story a bit, I'll be using this SDG integration model. It's an iterative approach in which we try to really embed the SDGs across our organization. As you can see, it's about awareness, it's about priorities, having a strategy and an implementation plan, and then also measuring and reporting on impact. And when we talk about awareness, which we think is an important first step, that's about leadership buy-in. And we were lucky enough to quite quickly have that buy-in from our board of management and to be able to start piloting some activities around the SDGs, to start talking about goals for the SDGs, about prioritizing SDGs for PwC. Then we realized that we also needed all of our employees for that, because ultimately that sustainability only works if it's owned by the entire organization. So our awareness efforts are also about that. And being a knowledge institution, for PwC and for us, it's really important, and our biggest impact is in also sharing that knowledge, not only with our colleagues, but also externally. And that's why we've been doing quite a bit around thought leadership for the SDGs, some of which some of these publications have been shared with you as pre-reads. And we see an important role, well, maybe even more towards the future. We see that stakeholders expect from us that we have a role in the public debate around sustainability topics, that we have a clear point of view on social issues, and that we actually contribute to well, some of the standards that are being developed, or some of the coalitions that are driving change. For example, recently we joined a task force on nature-related financial disclosures. Well, that's where we hope to share some of our thinking around biodiversity and biodiversity loss with a broader group of stakeholders, to be able to actually contribute to systemic change. Well, that's where that part of sharing knowledge more broadly comes in.
Mm.
And then I will provide a few examples, but I'll go through the model first to sort of explain what it means. And then with SDG prioritization, we realized that you can't do it all at the same time, but also not all. We cannot. There are certain SDGs to which we can contribute more, initially we started with 4 focus SDGs for which we defined ambitions. But as the world is changing, and as we see also our organization changing, we keep reassessing where our biggest impact sits. So every 2 years we do an analysis of the SDGs to which we can contribute most, and where our priorities should sit, just to see if our ambitions and then strategy is still on track with our biggest impact areas. And I'll talk a bit about how we are doing that, how we take stakeholder input into account in doing that, and how that leads to our focus SDGs. And from the strategy and implementation part, that's really about having ambitions that actually contribute to the SDGs, considering what is needed, what our share of the pie is to actually achieve the SDGs in 2030, about actions and pathways and partnerships that we're having with a range of organizations, because ultimately SDG 17, we cannot do that by ourselves. And then impact measurement and reporting. Well, this session comes at the right moment, because we recently published our annual report, and our team has been working really hard on developing a framework to actually measure PwC's impact, and we've recently disclose that in our annual report. So I'll be able to show you some of the work and explain some of the work that we've done. If there's no questions about the model, then I'll start with explaining some of our initiatives around awareness. Great. So as I said, I think specifically sustainability experts tend to be very ambitious, and you measure yourself to what you think is needed to contribute or to achieve the SDGs, and sometimes you need the intermediate steps, and that's what we saw in creating awareness. So start small, but don't wait until you have it perfect. Just get started with with small projects. Which we did was we measured tire pressure of all cars in our parking lot, and then colleagues received the message of their and of the impact that has on having flat tires, on the CO2 impact that has. That was just to create awareness, and it was a very, very simple, small project. Well, it was a first step, and then at a certain point, when well, the SDGs are 2 years in place, we realized that we needed to engage more of our colleagues, and more of our colleagues needed to be aware of these topics, to be able to have meaningful conversations with each other and with our clients. And we wanted to do something bold, something different. And we do a lot of e-learns, but we wanted something that would actually speak to people's hearts as well. So what we did is we developed a VR experience and game around sustainable development goals. You see that in the top middle. It's what we call the SDG Dome. And in the dome, 8 people work in a team. They first see a VR experience in which they see the ice caps melting and the rainforest burning away, and people working in sweatshops in Asia, for example, and that really well triggers emotions. But then they work in teams and answer questions around the SDGs, facts and figures, and about what needs to change to actually get to that better world, but also how innovative technologies can support that transformation. And we initially thought this would be an initiative that would be in our office for 4 weeks, but it ended up being there for a year, and all our colleagues started asking, well, I don't have a time slot booked, but I really want to do this. And that actually showed that even the colleagues who were a bit skeptical in the beginning eventually took their clients to the SDG Dome and had a conversation about, well, what this means for their everyday lives, but also for the work that we do together or the work that we do at PwC. And that now led us to recently develop and roll out a fully fledged ESG training, which you see on the bottom left, really deep dives into some of these topics and provides all our colleagues with sufficient basic knowledge to actually consider that societal lens in all the work we do. And I think important for us is that we have a range of colleagues working on ESG topics. They directly help our clients with our net zero strategy. They help our clients become more circular, or they help our clients with their sustainability reporting. But we also have a range of colleagues doing work that you wouldn't initially say is SDG related, but really needs that SDG lens. And our aim with this training is for everybody to understand that there's a societal lens and an SDG lens to all the work that we do. So that's a project I've been working on, and that I'm really keen to be rolling out for all our colleagues soon. Another awareness tool that we recently launched is our environmental footprint insights tool. So it's an app. It's a dashboard. It has a personal employee view, it has a project view, and it has a PwC view, and it actually shows your carbon impact per month from business-related travel. And it's been quiet on that app for 2 years, but I recently had to travel to Munich, and I was actually shocked when I got my update from the app this month, and when I saw how many trees needed to be planted to compensate for that flight. So we really use this as an awareness tool, but we also use this as a tool for our employees to do carbon budgeting for the projects that they do, and to have a dialogue with our clients on how we work together. So are we still going to be traveling with 5 people to Manila for this project, or will we do a team of 2 and will the others join online? Will we do that 5 times per year, or is 2 sufficient? And I think I think this is a range of initiatives that shows why we think that awareness is so important, but it's also, and that mainly relates to what we do internally. But as I said, the biggest impact that we have is probably to our role as a thought leader and through the work that we do with clients, obviously. And that's why we engage in partnerships like the UN Global Compact, but also why we develop publications like the SDG barometer, which is about the impact of COVID-19 on achieving the SDGs and what companies can do to contribute. And things like the SDG challenge, which shows how companies are embedding the SDGs in their strategy and in their reporting. Yeah, so then if you have awareness, you need to start making the plans, and you need to know where that impact sits. And this slide shows our value creation process. A bit technical, it's a lot, but what it's meaning to say is, and what is important here is that well, when defining on where your impact sits as an organization and what the important topics are, stakeholders, and this nicely shows how that runs in a circle. So every 2 years we have stakeholder dialogues. We talk to a wide range of stakeholders, politicians, academics, students, NGOs, and we ask them what they expect from us. We ask them where they think our biggest impact sits. That includes our colleagues and our clients, obviously. And based on that input and on a range of analysis for which we use the SDG progress reports, we look at where we are in the Netherlands, where we should be, and where we can have the biggest impact with our strategy, with our people, and with our expertise. Our recent analysis resulted in 9 SDGs on which we can make the biggest impact. But obviously 9 is a lot, and we want to focus. So we've selected 4 for which we think we need to do a little bit, put in a little extra effort for the coming years. Those are our focus SDGs, and for those SDGs we set additional ambitions and targets. For us now, our focus SDGs are 5, 10, 13, and 8. Yeah, in defining these SDGs and looking at your material topics or impact areas, I think I put here the value chain perspective, and I think it's becoming increasingly important for organizations to not only consider corporate sustainability from a business operations perspective, but also to look at your wider value chain and supply chain responsibilities. So that means that we are also need to work with our suppliers to see how they are reducing their carbon emissions, for example. But it also means that we are looking into how we can contribute to societal discussions on what non-financial reporting should look like, or what sustainable aviation should be. And that's, I think, so to conclude, I think that as your priority SDGs have a country perspective, what we need to do in the Netherlands to achieve the SDGs, an industry perspective, where can we contribute as a professional services firm through the work that we do for our clients, but also for our clients' stakeholders. And it's the company specific. So where are the skills and our expertise of our people best put to practice? And eventually, that then led us to define ambitions and targets for our focus SDGs. And here's the overview of ambitions. There's a range of intermediate and additional targets to it. This is a summary, and it actually shows how we try to look at our piece of the pie, what we would need to do to achieve the SDGs by 2030, what intermediate steps we would need to take. And that means also our science-based commitment, for example, to reduce carbon emissions. So we had our carbon reduction targets validated by the Science-Based Target Initiatives recently. What was I going to say more about this slide? I was going to say that we would, that I wanted to show you a short film on some of the activities that we do that actually nicely captures how we work from ambitions, policy processes, partnerships, and innovation to achieving our impact for our focus SDGs. And I hope that you can hear the sound for the film I'm going to show.
No sound yet. Yeah, there's no sound.
Wow.
Yeah, now I wanted to show this video because it actually nicely shows how you work from identifying your biggest impact areas through setting ambitions and commitments to implementing policy and processes. And I think carbon from our carbon emissions, I think 90% is related to mobility. 50% of which is our air mobility. So this is one of our biggest impact and focus areas. And that's why to achieve that net zero commitment, we realized that we need to do something in this area. In the Netherlands, we introduced an internal carbon price of 100 euros per ton of CO2 emitted, which then is our budget for carbon offsets, but also it enables us to do other projects for our sustainability team. And we can indeed fly less. We can take the train to Munich or to Paris, but we will still need to work globally. We'll still need to see other people. So we realize that that isn't enough. And that's why we're working together with some other organizations actually to do research and to support innovation for more sustainable aviation. And some of those examples you saw in the video. So the electric plane that did its first tour around the Netherlands recently to explore if and how we can use electric flights for short distance. And the biofuels is a coalition of organizations who commit to taking off using biofuels for the coming years, and that enables us to have actually a factory in the Netherlands producing biofuels. Because I think currently the only one is in San Francisco, I think. So that's actually from the ambition to the policy and the processes to through the partnerships and the innovation part that we need to achieve the SDG 13 and to take our part in that.
Hey, Tom, is there any way to replay that video with sound? Because I didn't hear the sound.
Didn't you? You did not hear the sound?
Yeah, there was no sound, Tom.
I'll
And I heard you speaking about the carbon offsets, and I'm wondering who audits the folks who are doing those?
Shall we try the video first? I'll get back to that.
Do that. Yeah, no problem.
This is not the right video. Can you hear it now?
Yes.
Great.
Flying inspires many people, but its climate impact is absolutely alarming. Aviation already accounts for 2.5% of the world's CO2 emissions, while today only 11% of the world population travels by air. What is the solution? Fly less? Take the train? Meet virtually when possible? Compensate all flights? Donate the first fully electric aircraft to the Dutch Aviation Research Centre? Invest in sustainable aviation fuels to reduce CO2 emissions? Introduce an internal carbon price of €100 per tonne to speed up the fuel transition? Or maybe support the European Commission in the design of emissions monitoring and reporting regulations? At PwC the Netherlands, we do all of the above. Because until we have a silver bullet for sustainable aviation, we need to do everything we can. It all adds up.
So, Heidi, what was your question again?
Okay, so I heard you mention about carbon offsets, and I know that has been one way that companies try to mitigate the impact of their travel, among other things. And there have been some alarming reports in the news that some of these projects, carbon offset projects, are actually doing some environmental damage to the locations where they're being placed. That they go in and say, we're going to plant this, whatever they're going to plant, but it actually is taking away from, for example, biodiversity in the area. And so I've been hearing that some of those folks could really use PwC to audit what they're doing to make sure that it is truly a sustainable solution and not just, oh, we're putting a Band-Aid, but we're actually creating more problems.
Yeah, and I think there's a huge opportunity there. So we will be talking about the EU taxonomy later on, which is a great sort of a handbook for what is sustainable and what isn't, and it covers some of these do no harm principles. So the interaction effects between some of the SDGs, there are a lot of discussions in the Netherlands around wind energy and how that affects biodiversity in some areas. I think we probably don't have the full answer with the EU taxonomy, but I think it is going to help us because it is going to define what is truly green and truly contributing. I mean, carbon offsets are not a solution. We need to reduce our CO2 emissions. And then we need to start thinking about ways to mitigate the impact of the remaining emissions. And I think our job for the coming years is to look at how we can move from offsets to high quality removals. So that is also part of our net zero commitment, and that is where our role also sits in the innovation and research space. Yeah.
I have another comment or a thought. I noticed that of your 4 focus SDGs, I got really excited when I saw SDG 5 appear on there. In part, as Larry knows, I've been talking about this recently in our news. We got a news piece that says that 60% of college students are female, 70% of valedictorians are female, and 76% of the students who go abroad during their undergraduate studies are white female. And yet females comprise 8% of the boardrooms in Fortune 500 companies. And as I spoke to one of my friends as a retired PwC partner, and she and I talked about it yesterday, and she said that actually PwC had been doing initiatives to, she mentioned that in some countries where there's maternal leave, obviously it can impact a female's career if you know, like in Sweden where you can take up to 2 years for maternity leave. Of course, they encourage fathers also to take paternity leave in Sweden, so that balances the equation a little bit. But her point was, for PwC, was how can we provide some training, because she said obviously you have continuing education units that you have to do various things and how, you know, those type of things. But I thought that was interesting to set those targets, because it's sort of stagnated in America. We have more women getting into business, but not rising into the top. And by the way, my friend is a female, so she clearly managed that successfully with PwC.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the topic in the Netherlands, if you look at our SDG progress reports, we see that we're not doing well on SDG 5. Actually, we're one of the worst in Europe, in the Netherlands, for women in leadership positions. And I think we have a range of initiatives around female leadership and supporting female leadership. But it starts with awareness. So where I got to develop that ESG and sustainability training for all our colleagues. We are currently also rolling out an inclusion and diversity related training, but I'm very much focused on the inclusion part of it. On understanding other people's position and the challenges they might be facing, and trying to connect to those a bit more.
Yeah.
That's great, though. It's good to see that PwC has some self-awareness and is working towards this goal, because in my view, I would like to see that in more companies, that they're talking about it, because if we are thinking about merit, then we're showing statistics that indicates that females can participate fully. It's just that there is a dilemma around it, and we need to figure out as a whole group, how do we as a society, how do we as an industry, as a company, how do we, you know, make sense of this great talent that we have in our organizations and help it so that then everybody can maximize the talent to the nth degree. Yeah,
and that's probably a nice bridge to the part on the impact measurement and reporting, because I think I'll leave the detailed technical discussions to Kylan, but a bit on how we try to be transparent and to get decision useful insights on our impact. So these are our 9 material SDGs, the SDGs that you saw in our value creation model. And as you can see, for SDG 10 and SDG 5, they do need a bit more attention. We have ambitious diversity targets, but we now need to need to speed up to actually achieve those targets through a range of projects and programs. And this is the framework that we developed. It's not comprehensive, so there's room for improvement, but it includes I think 100 KPIs with sub KPIs, but it could also include like 200. The point here is that it does provide us with input for strategic dialogue on where our impact is. And it has been a great way of engaging in a dialogue with our colleagues, with our stakeholders, with some experts in the organization on where our impact sits, what KPIs should be that are in this model, and what we should be monitoring. That's one of the first steps. But then actually to say something about impact, you need to sort of have a reference scenario. You need to start benchmarking yourself. So the model includes a range of KPIs for each of these SDGs, but it also includes a sort of a benchmark or a threshold value where we measure ourselves against where we should be to contribute to this to a certain SDG. And as you can see, we have some work to do for SDG 12 and SDG 13, and then for the diversity related SDGs. And then this is very useful for defining where those impact areas are and where we should actually have different policies or processes or programs in place. And maybe a bit more about the framework before, without wanting to get too technical here, is what we did is we use some of the reporting frameworks and standards that are out there. KPIs for the SDGs, there was a question. Well, there's the KPIs that are actually, or the indicators that are in the United Nations SDG frameworks aren't very suitable for business to measure impact. You need to tailor those. And luckily, quite a bit of work has been done by the GRI, for example, and by the WEF-IBC, who have developed their WEF-IBC metrics. So we've been using those metrics, and we've been talking to a lot of stakeholders, and we asked them, well, which metrics best measure the impact. We've looked at reports around the SDGs on how to measure those impacts. And so we sort of tailored that to PwC. And then came, I mean, a challenge in collecting the data, because some of it was already out there, but some of it is new. So we needed to start getting information from our suppliers on what they're doing to reduce their carbon emissions, to have, again, that value chain perspective to our impact, for example. And what we have done here is we've aggregated the impact scores per KPI, because no one wants to look at 200 indicators on a dashboard. So it's sort of a click through deep dive dashboard in which we can deep dive into some of the red and gray and green areas. And obviously this needs to be supported by qualitative story to be able to understand this, and that is what we do in a dialogue, and that is how we use this as steering information for our impact around the SDGs.
Yeah, and I think, Tom, the dialogue is where it starts, right? I think just to add to the diversity SDG and how we try to do that as PwC in the Netherlands, I think we're one of the, actually, the score here doesn't look good, but I think we are, as a firm in the Netherlands, I think we're one of the front runners in how we position ourselves in the market. And I was personally involved in a dialogue over the last year where we addressed the topic of cultural diversity within the firm, and had a chain of emails and letters going around the firm from one person to another, each from different backgrounds and different cultures, giving perspectives on this topic. And it was actually, I guess, fueled by the whole Black Lives Matter movement that happened in the US, which caused I guess a dialogue in the Netherlands as well about the topic. and which is a topic that has been out there for years, right? It's nothing new, but I think having the conversation is where it starts, and breaking some of the taboos around it. And I felt like being part, me as a tall Dutch white male, why would I be part of that? You might think, but having each person from their perspective give their opinion and listening to each other is really what starts to drive that change. And as it relates to female male, for example, in the boardroom, there's regulation in the Netherlands, and I think in Europe, where you have to, as a company, comply or explain in your financial statements about your diversity policy as it relates to male female board members. And if you don't meet the minimum of, I think it's 30% off the top of my head, female board members, you have to explain why and what steps you're taking to get there. Now, it doesn't mean that you're non-compliant. So it's kind of a soft measure, if you will, for companies out here, but it does create awareness, right? And it does create the fact that you have to report on this every year, starts to trigger, your policies that you might implement to get that to a better equation, if you will. And I think, as humans, it's good to be aware of your conscious or unconscious bias based on your own mental model, which is how you grew up, what you've been taught, what your experience are, and how you look at the world influences how you view other people. And somebody that's a little bit different from you, do you want those? If you have a choice, do you want to work with somebody that is really similar to you, or do you? And again, we come to the what would I do differently? Do you choose somebody that is really different from yourself, because it impacts the way we cooperate and it improves different viewpoints on how we deliver to our clients? And so I know from experience a diverse team operates more effectively because of the different viewpoints. And are you willing to get uncomfortable by surrounding yourself with people that are not like you? Is a key question.
Well said, Robin. I really like that. Are you willing to get uncomfortable by surrounding yourself with people who are not like you?
Yeah.
I think that's a really big takeaway. Did you say, was that an EU regulation or a Dutch regulation about the 30% of the board?
I know it's Dutch, but I'm not sure if it's EU,
okay,
to be honest. But I know for sure it's Dutch.
Yeah, so that's something that is certainly a contrast with the United States. I don't think that we could expect to see some sort of a federal directive come down, right?
Right.
I don't think I could expect that. So that's really interesting, Robin, and because that brings us back to this question we talked about a while ago, how does culture impact SDG implementation? And if we just look at that, just thinking about that, a minimum of 30%, or at least explain why. And of course, the pain of having to explain why makes you think, well, why aren't we? And is it, it brings up all those questions. So in my view, that almost makes me believe that something cultural in the Netherlands would drive that. Something cultural in the United States might not want to do that. I don't know what everyone else thinks on that, but interesting, really interesting. Thank you for that. I'm going to make that as a quote, by the way. Get uncomfortable with being around people who are very different from you with different perspectives.
I think to your point around culture, I think a couple of years ago in dialogues with organizations and with our clients in the Netherlands, and you would ask them what are the challenges you see in integrating the SDGs into your organization, and they would say, I think, like leadership buy-in and awareness with our colleagues of the importance of these topics, and even demand from clients. We don't see our clients wanting these products or services. So what can we do? And you definitely see that shifting, because generally companies now, even the smaller ones, say that they feel that more and more of their employees actually want this and actually want their employer to contribute to a better world and to social topics. And you see more and more discussions coming around in creating that level playing field for which we need things like due diligence regulations and the EU taxonomy, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, really good.
I think Robin's point too about the dialogue as the starting point, whether it's comfortable or uncomfortable. I think it parallels something we heard yesterday from Carola, which was the real innovation here might not be new fuels or new technology. It might be the social innovation around the difficult conversations and new forms of governance. Who's allowed at the board table to be part of making decisions? And so I think the social innovation, which includes conversations for action, conversations with stakeholders that we value their input. I think we're seeing a little parallel here today. So thank you guys. Thank you, Robin, for the dialogue part of this that really stands on the shoulders of what Tom said, of, just the process of getting people talking, really important.
Yep.
And what strikes me here is that when I think about hiring, and I remember back in the day when I made my first resume, and they, the career centers say, well, you could put a little bit about your interests on there. And if it does, like, I could put down I was a varsity coxswain for the crew, right? If you didn't do crew, it nobody cares. But if you did, and they're going to go, oh, she's one of us, let's hire her, right? And so I've often heard that hiring managers are looking, they often look like, well, they're like me, I'm going to hire someone like me, but then we don't get that diversity of thought. And it is hard when somebody comes from a completely different culture and you're like, I don't know if I even like it, and you don't even know why, because you haven't identified, maybe that is a cultural thing, maybe this person behaves differently. Riley's certainly been following a lot of cultural models, so he knows what I'm talking about.
It's
Great,
interesting, Heidi, you triggered me. How much of an advantage is it in the US if you apply for a job and you're from the same college, you're an alumni?
Oh,
huge.
It's a big deal.
It's a big deal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you can imagine it's the same thing with diversity, because if you went to a particular college or you did certain things, you're around people like you. But then when you start to look at other avenues, it becomes, I think it's just a cognitive challenge, really, to overcome. And I suppose that's probably going to be part of the conversation of how to help people bridge that gap.
Yeah.
Diversity in general.
Also looking at the time, Kylan prepared a very nice presentation on some of the developments in the reporting landscape. So we could do maybe one more question on the SDGs, but we could also move to that next presentation maybe.
I know that Kylan prepared quite a bit for us, so let's give her a chance and get her on there.
Okay. And Tom, you're fine because I think you had another video.
No, we'll skip that. Yeah, I have another video, but we can skip it.
Okay, that sounds good. Are we okay without a break, or do we want 4 minutes to just stand up, or we're just gonna keep going? Okay.
We keep going.
That sounds good. Great. Yeah, my section is a bit more technical. I did stay silent when I guess everyone else was kind of asking questions on impact, et cetera, just because I feel as though we may touch on some of it. And I also didn't want to derail the earlier presentations. The regulations are very new and in many cases not yet complete or published. So hopefully this will give you a bit of flavor of what's to come. Also, you mind if we go into presentation mode, Tom? Awesome, thank you. My background from day one is and was accounting. And I believe a lot of you, based on your introductions, are marketing, project management backgrounds, etc. So I do hope this is not too technical. Please let me know and we can kind of break it down. And of course, feel free to jump in with any questions that you may have. If we go to the next slide, I just added this one in kind of as we were conversing, so more on the go, but it's to set the scene because I wanted to show all the players in the ESG reporting landscape, and it's quite a few, and everyone has mentioned their professional and personal SDGs, but I'm really curious to know about the rest of your knowledge and experience. Is anyone aware of these players, whether it be the GRI, the SASB, the WEF, the European Commission, or CSR Hub?
Certainly GRI, yes.
Okay, great. Well, GRI is definitely helpful, as we'll be talking about them in a little bit as well. But how this looks like,
Island.
Yes.
We just want to say that that's the Global Reporting Initiative. Larry and I are familiar with it. Larry's presented with them, you know, at IABS and things. So, but the students may not have known that that was Global Reporting Initiative, which is based in Amsterdam.
That's Amsterdam based too, yeah.
Yeah, and it's an independent international organization to help businesses and other organizations take responsibility for their impact by providing them with a global common language. And actually, they have reporting standards out there already that companies use to report any of their sustainability standards on now. And is anyone aware of the CSRD? And I know we mentioned the EU taxonomy, but is anyone aware of the CSRD? I see some shaking heads. Sorry, Nama. Okay, great. Well, we will get to that. That is a new European Regulation and Directive Act that's coming up quite quickly. And so what you see on the screen is we have the reporting standards that are already out there for Europe and the US, being SASB and GRI. You have some reporting frameworks, and then you have these harmonizing alliances with the European Commission that has created the CSRD with this delegated act to try and just put all these components together to have one reporting structure. What do we, so we can have consistency and comparability in our financials. And then of course, there's all these principles and guidelines and ratings and ranking agencies. And so before we get started in the rest of the presentation, I have one last question to kick it off. There are a lot of parties involved in this ESG reporting landscape, as you see on the slide. Do you think they're all trying to get in on the reporting requirements and the compliance aspect just to make a killing? Or do you think that there's a benefit to these companies reporting on ESG?
Repeat the question one time.
Do you think everyone's just trying to get involved because it's the next big ticket to make a profit? Or do you think there's going to actually be a benefit to companies reporting on ESG?
That's a good, maybe I'll take a cut at it. I'm just wondering if it's, everybody's still clamoring to sort of figure this out, and they want a place at the table, or they want to be a part of the dialogue. I didn't think of it as a revenue-based activity, but it's they want to be in the question, maybe, or they want to be in the conversation. Maybe that's naive.
I agree. I think it's almost a little bit of both. I think maybe some companies are doing it from a revenue standpoint, and just the culture here in the United States, it's very individualistic, and I think we're starting to see more of a shift to it not being just revenue based, but being the right thing to do, and more being an inclusive culture. So I know that's not a great answer, but yeah, I think it's kind of shifting the needle from the revenue side to the other side a little bit here in the States.
Yeah, to me, it feels like a lot of organizations are kind of seeing the writing on the wall that that's where public sentiment and regulation are headed. So some companies are trying to kind of jump on the bandwagon earlier on, be early adopters, so that this doesn't become impactful to their business later. Just kind of recognizing where things are going and taking advantage of the revenue savings in the meantime. There's a lot of these initiatives that they can take on that are both going to meet potential future regulation as well as be financially expeditious to them now.
Yeah, great. Thank you all for your input. I do think it's a little bit of both, but there's definitely a lot of value for companies to embrace ESG and start reporting on it. So if we go to the next slide. Perfect. Thanks, Tom. So while the EU taxonomy and the CSRD are regulations and delegated acts and therefore compulsory to comply with for those companies in scope, and we'll talk about in scope in a minute, these directives should not only be seen as compliance projects, but also an opportunity for businesses. This slide's going to highlight the benefits and added value of ESG for the company. And then although the EU taxonomy and CSRD are not yet active, what we have up here is some facts based on research performed on global, most likely US companies, acting and reporting on their non-financial ESG impacts. So the research shows indications of benefits that exist to companies that are involved with ESG reporting and have incorporated that into their strategy. Some of this information is actually from Diligence Insights, and it's another company that is out of the US that has done this study on US-based companies or global companies. So this is more from a US perspective and not even from a European perspective where we've maybe been further along in this regulatory environment. So if we take a look at the opportunities on the slides, and Robin even alluded to this one and mentioned it in the beginning, that borrowing money can be cheaper if you perform strongly on ESG. What we're also seeing probably more in the European landscape, but maybe also in the US, when hiring or retaining staff, ESG can be a strong motivator. People are really looking to see what is your ESG strategy from a environment and also people and growth and well-being perspective. Some of these studies from the US are showing that companies with strong ESG performance are far less likely to go bankrupt. And the reason being is that they are paying attention long term. And what does that have? What's the impact to their company? So companies ranked highly for ESG have been shown to perform better than average. Their stock prices tend to be less volatile too. And that was even a study that I read about after COVID too. So it wasn't just pre-COVID. These were things that had popped up in the news all throughout 2020 and 2021. Investors are paying attention to this, and there's the so-called ESG controversy, and events can cause companies' stock to underperform in the market for as long as 2 years. So it does follow you around if you have bad press on this as well. And we kind of alluded to, I think, an oil company that's been in the news a lot, or at least in the Netherlands. I am going to bring in real quick a new slide. So Tom, before you change, I'm adding a new one. This I thought would be helpful. So Tom, I think it should be refreshed. Oh, if you go back one more, yummer. Okay, I guess it's not. Because I just wanted to address kind of, I think, Riley's and Lee's questions on, kind of what's the focus. Oh, perfect. Oh no, if you go to the next slide, it should hopefully pop up now. Okay, perhaps not. It was just, again, talking about investor expectations and consumer demand, more with a US focus, because I believe Lee and Riley, you mentioned just, how do you sell this to business? And I believe it's, there is proven record of doing good helps in the long term. And yes, there is a cost to it now, but you need to be thinking about your future. And then also there is a lot of societal pressure. So when it's coming not only from regulation, but investors' expectations and consumer demand. And that was one slide that I added in based on your comment earlier. Sorry, I wasn't able to get into the deck sooner. Was trying to look for the, oh, perfect, there it is. Thanks, Tom. Had to find it from my other presentation to loop in, but just to let you know, why is this critical now? And even as PwC, when we talk about proposals, we really want it to be ambition focused. We want to talk to our clients and have these difficult conversations of what makes sense, that it's not just regulation and why you need to do it, but what's the benefit for you, but what's also the benefit for others. And there's significant pressure from both investors and consumers, as you've probably seen also from BlackRock. All right, so we'll move forward from this slide. It was just to touch and address some of your questions. Yeah, that's fine to go to the next one. Thanks, Tom. With the images, yeah, of the CSRD, EU taxonomy, and SFDR. So there are 3 major ESG reporting directives and regulations being rolled out by the European Commission between now and 2023. So that's quite a lot. We're not going to go through all of this. This is a lot on the screen, but the EU Commission is this harmonizing alliance. And you can see between these 3 standards, there's a lot of interdependencies or connections with each other, that it's not just going to say implement one and then you have to change or create all these different ways to follow the EU taxonomy and the CSRD, but they're really trying to build off of one another. So this shows the slide, the interaction between the 3 big regulatory changes coming up. And so it's just, you know, linking one big piece of the puzzle together, and not any one regulation should be standalone. The CSRD is being replaced from the NFRD, which is the non-financial reportive directive. And that came about actually in April of this year. And that's to really help with disclosures. That the scope has been expanded, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But there's actually alignment between the CSRD and the taxonomy. And the taxonomy is to create a common understanding of green economic activities and support the Green Deal. And there's this article within the taxonomy regulation where it requires companies within scope of the CSRD to report on their sustainable activities. So again, it's all interconnected and aligned. So if you're in scope for one, you're most likely in scope for another, because they just want really clear, consistent reporting that is comparable across entities. And then one thing that we will not touch on is the SFDR, that is for financial institutions, for financial products and entities, just trying to increase their transparency. My background is more in tech and industrial products, so I'll be focusing more on the CSRD and the taxonomy than something for financial companies. But just so you know that, and that regulation is out there. Okay. So we will get to the next slide with the CSRD to just kind of talk about it. Any questions right now on just some of the 3 regulations? Okay, looks like no. And I hope I'm not going too fast, but just trying to be mindful of time to get some big ticket information out there. So in the previous slide, you saw that there are 3 regulations. One was the NFRD that is now becoming the CSRD. Well, within Europe, under the NFRD, it was estimated that 11,000 companies would be in scope. Well, now with the proposed scope under the CSRD, which came out in April of this year, the scope will increase to 49,000 companies across the EU. So it really is the biggest reporting transformation to happen to corporate reporting since IFRS. And it's just not enough that to report on sustainable information. A lot of companies have separate sustainability reports already, but it's really crucial that we report and embed such ESG reporting into our financials with the same rigor, quality, and controls as our financial information. And in addition to this being the biggest transformation since IFRS, it's also very complex and has an ambitious timeline. Right now, reporting standards are not even out. It's just a directive mentioning that you need to report on sustainability matters. And the detailed reporting standards are expected by the mid of next year, literally October 2022, 1 year from now. And the reporting obligation is that it will need to be published in reports from January 2024, meaning the reporting period 2023. So when you report on your 2023 financials in 2024, you need to report on the CSRD. So it's going to be a quick turnaround for companies to embed this information. So there's a lot going on here to make it even that much more difficult, aside from being the biggest transformation. And while this isn't just with the EU landscape, I know the EU is leading with the CSRD and the EU taxonomy. The US is not far behind, because the SEC chair confirmed that he is targeting a proposal for mandatory climate risk disclosures by the end of the year. So this will be coming pretty fast to the US as well. And so I have a question for you. Do you think, or do you know of any companies that you may be working on that could be impacted by the CSRD? All right, I see one nodding head. That is great, because US companies operating in Europe will definitely be impacted by this. So we'll take. Oh, Larry, were you about to say something?
No, again, if you're a multinational and you have a US, a European presence, you're obligated now.
Yeah, that's correct.
So that would mean Lilly, which we have several folks working for Lilly, Eli Lilly. I would imagine that Lee, your company, is going to be impacted already because it's Siemens, Siemens Healthineers.
Yeah, we're based out of Germany, so for sure.
And Roche, which is another
European,
Swiss company, but US presence here in Indy. Wow. So yeah, and so and I love the timeline here too, that this is a quick turnaround from standards being suggested to then moving to actually doing the reporting within a year of the standards coming out.
Yeah.
Wow.
Although one might push back and say that didn't they come out with the 17 SDGs in 2015, and now we're 2021, and the goals are for 2030, but we're going to get them reported in 2024. So that it almost seems as though it's taken quite a bit of time even to get to where we are. I mean, it's another way of looking at it, right? We started the Global Compact in 2010.
Yep.
Right? And the 17 SDGs 2015. So we're starting to get that movement. But for us, it does seem quite quick, certainly on that turnaround once the decision's been made.
Yeah. No, it definitely has. And because of it's funny, everyone in the ESG practice here is talking about it's about time it's taking notice. And I think everyone else on the other end who has to do the reporting and the disclosures is saying this, wait a minute, slow down, this is too fast. If we skip to the next slide, I'm going to touch on a few just super quickly so you're aware of it. But I don't think because it hasn't hit the US yet, you need to be super involved. But since you are part of global companies, maybe you'll hear talk about it. So what happened with the CSRD is there's this scope extension, which we've talked about. There's an assurance requirement. So not only do you need to report this, reporting it in your standalone sustainability report, reporting this information in your on your website is not sufficient. You need to include it in your financials, in your management report, and therefore it needs an audit. Right now, it will be an audit under limited assurance as opposed to reasonable assurance, which is based on reasonable assurance is for like 10Ks. So you guys know that there's the financials are appropriate without material misstatement. Limited assurance is a bit less, but nonetheless, if the information is now going in your financial statements, that means companies who may have reported on sustainable information separately now needs to bring up that timeline, and it needs to get audited, which means you'll need controls, processes, systems, reports in order to get that information included in your financials for the auditors to take a look at it and assess the reliability of it. So there's the assurance requirement, there is the management report aspect, and then similar to the US, there will be digital tagging of the information to make it easier to find. So those are the 4 biggest changes of the CSRD coming into effect. All right. We'll go to the next one because some of you guys have clients that are European based or entities in Europe. So I think this will be the most relevant for you. Before, under the NFRD, and I'm trying not to focus too much on that because that's kind of outdated now and the scope really increased. It used to be all listed clients in Europe. So if you're listed on a Euronext exchange, you are included in this scope. But now it's including all large undertakings. And if you see in the middle section, the first bullet, it says you need to meet 2 criteria out of the following. Net turnover, so your revenue is greater than 40 million, your balance sheet total is greater than 20 million, or you have more than 250 employees. So again, this is really hitting all large multinationals. And then there's an issue of how are you going to report for it? Because if your parent within Europe, not the parent in the US, but if the parent entity based on legal structures is able to report consolidatedly, you don't need to report on an entity by entity level. But if the parent of the, like say, Lilly Holdings Europe BV can report consolidated figures, you're fine. But if not, each entity within Europe, within that structure that meets this criteria, will need to report their own financial information. So it could be a burden to then Germany, Spain, Italy, or the parent to kind of report on it on a consolidated level. Okay.
So this is not just publicly traded firms. This could be firms that are it's just based on it's a scale issue.
Yeah.
Wow.
And there also, when you read the directive, it states if we focus only on EU companies, there is going to be a significant burden to anyone operating in Europe. And then they are afraid that an EU company will switch to say, I'm no longer going to be listed here or headquartered in Europe. So they actually see the very last bullet, it says, including non-EU subsidiaries. So again, let's take Nike, for example. Nike is headquartered in Portland, Oregon, but yet they have operations in Europe. So if they meet the size criteria, all of those entities within Europe, even if they're not part of the EU for fiscal tax purposes or restructuring or whatever their setup is in Europe, if it reports into a European entity in that structure, you would need to disclose it.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing between the lines here, it's one thing to say, oh, if on the financial side, a company can get a loan if they're doing ESG related activities, they might have a lower interest rate. Now here it's the way to encourage companies to be in the game is on financial reporting, and now you have to do some disclosure, and it's the financial reporting requirements are now the incentive or the encouragement to have companies kind of get in the game.
Yeah, so financial reporting is definitely now saying we're kind of forcing you to get in the game.
Yeah.
There's still benefits because investors and shareholders are also saying we need this for a variety of reasons.
But it's an incredibly great signal. I mean, and this is it's different than a kind of a government incentive. Or it's now a requirement, but it signals there's a collective view that this is an important thing to do, and I'm sure it also has a payoff for you guys as in PwC as an organization, that you're able to bring companies along so they're in compliance with this.
Yeah, it's definitely great from that perspective. But we're really trying to also, when we have these conversations, not always focus on the compliance. We really want to be their sparring partner to help them on this journey, and understand their ambition level, because there's such a difference between doing the bare minimum versus what do your shareholders really need. So we are trying to challenge the status quo there. And we also don't want companies to feel like, oh, great, we're coming in because this is a mandatory regulation, but no, how can we do good?
Right. And that to move from compliance to strategy, or, that I think that's ultimately where it needs to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe one example as it relates to that, if I may, I'm having these conversations with my clients as well, making them aware that, hey, it's going to be in 2 years' time, you're going to have to comply with this. But that's a compliance conversation I'm not trying to emphasize. I want to help them get to that level that they are able to report. And I guess what's driving the strategic realignment for companies is that they eventually have to report on something, provide information to the outside world, which consequently also has an assurance product related to it. So an external accounting firm or auditing firm provides assurance over this information. And if you have to do that as an audit firm, then the first place you start is the company has to design processes and internal controls to be able to support or report on this and evidence that they've, accounted for this in the right way.
Yeah.
And that's where it starts. And so the compliance factor as an outcome, I guess, based on drivers, is causing companies to rethink or making them rethink their internal processes and controls, because at some point they're going to have to provide evidence as to, yes, our emissions were X amount or our energy usage was this amount. And so how do you prove that to a party that's providing assurance on that, is triggering that change in thought process for companies.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think about that question earlier when we were talking about using progress towards the SDGs as a sort of a marketing conversation. It would seem, it's clear to me, I mean, obviously like an annual report, people get that, they can read through that and they see things, but then they're going to be getting now these other reports and compliance and talking about where they are. And clearly, if you want to remain competitive, you certainly don't want to suddenly look like a laggard in key factors or areas. So if you see then even in pharmaceuticals and you see all the different players come up against each other, and now they get to be more transparent than ever before on these metrics, then I could envision that companies will need to look at that strategically, because it becomes de facto part of their marketing conversation. Even though it's not a marketing document per se, that reporting is going to be part of their marketing narrative.
And Robin or Kylan, do you see, I'm standing on the shoulders of what Heidi just said, the idea that there's some low-hanging fruit here, that companies go from a compliance discussion to, oh my gosh, here's a few things we are doing pretty well, or we're ahead of the curve on some things, and we didn't even recognize it, or here's some areas that are real opportunities for repositioning our investments. That at some point they go from discouraging compliance to, oh wow, there is some good news here about what we're up to. Do you find that with your clients?
Yeah, I think there's a spectrum of clients and their reactions. I mean, there's a company called Tony's Chocolonely in the Netherlands, and they do fair trade, no slave labor. And a lot of people love the chocolate, love the brand. So their marketing's in there and they're really forward thinking. So I think when you talk with them, they're like, no, we already got everything. It may be harder to change their mind or think in a different direction. Again, please note that these are speculations, but just of a company that's really far forward. Then there's other companies that want to get involved, have the ambition, but nowhere to start. And then others where I think we can make the most help on companies that just don't see it, that think of profits, but that's where we can get involved. So unfortunately, there's no good answer here other than everyone's on a spectrum and you kind of need to assess their ambition level and hopefully pull some different levers to get there and say, okay, I understand you want profits, but did you know this works? What can we help? Let's start with a few KPIs. So hopefully there's a way to convince people and take them along on this journey with us. And with all the growing pressure, it's kind of hard to ignore it.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned Tony's Chocolonely because that was one of our students have watched a series of videos produced by Rotterdam School of Management because they produced a MOOC around the SDGs. And as part of it, they do like the business case for each SDG. And one of them was with Tony's Chocolonely, which is, you can purchase it in here. But I did hear, I don't know if you've heard this, that I saw some news piece. I didn't chase it down too hard, but that there is some controversy over Tony's Chocolonely, that maybe somebody looked into it and maybe they're not as slave free as they thought. Maybe an auditor found out some little trail.
There's a documentary on it that I watched, and it's interesting to see. They did do an investigation, and since then, Tony and their I think their wrappers of the chocolate bars, they put a statement in there and they changed it up a little bit. I think they said we're doing our utmost to try to prevent, even though we might not be 100% there yet, or something along those lines. So they sort of toned it down a bit because they cannot guarantee that some of their suppliers in countries in Africa, for example, also follow the same guidelines, even though they try to do their best to make sure that they do. And if you think about it from an external reporting perspective and even an assurance perspective, it's pretty hard to audit that statement. How do you quantify a company trying to do their best to meet those requirements, but cannot fully get there? And how do you grade that? It's going to be interesting to look at in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Robin, was that documentary by chance on Netflix?
I think it was Dutch, to be honest.
Oh, but it's okay because Netflix does original Dutch content. So that's why if it was on there, we could see it. So just thought maybe I would check.
It's parallel, by the way. The Body Shop, as the cosmetics company, went through some of the same controversy. We're not doing animal testing, but some of their suppliers did, and they got a little sideways with what they were trying to do. Anyway, Kylan, this is really unique because it's seeing that the pressure again on companies to be in the game.
Yeah, and even I read in an article recently, Microsoft reports on scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, and because scope 3 is an estimate, scope 3 is like all the external emissions that we use, and so it can vary report to report, that there's no consistency. So that also makes it much more challenging too when we talk about get in the game and you're trying to do the right thing, but without these standards and the CSRD to kind of help guide a framework, you're just throwing out numbers that we can't really rely on. And you do notice actually quite a significant change year over year, or at least in that article that I read.
Yeah.
Stated.
If I could just throw in one other observation, at some level, the one of the first slides you put up, Kylan, is the one with all the various players. And it's really a set of NGOs from GRI to the Accounting Standards Board and all that, that at some point that's the SDG 17. The idea that you need a whole infrastructure of organizations working together to deal with this, the reporting rules. And it's a collaborative effort that requires quite a few different players at the table.
Yeah, completely agree. It's a significant undertaking and no one person can go at it alone, but it also makes it that much more difficult with all these players involved in trying to get to an end result and a standard that everyone agrees on. So
I have two thoughts, if I may add, now that we're coming up on the hour. One of it is I've been curious. All of us have seen a lot of startups. The SDGs and sustainability, that has fueled a ton of small businesses to say, you know what, you don't need to buy disposable Q-tips. You can get the one Q-tip that lasts forever. So there's innovation, new ideas. On the other hand, with the slower moving large companies, I'm always wondering at what point do they come online and will the small companies get enough groundswell to survive with what they're doing, or will they get squashed ultimately by the larger companies, or I suppose they get bought out? I suppose that would probably be the answer, is that they'll just incorporate them. Because I know that the consumer would say, again, all things equal, if I have a choice, if I can buy Kleenex that is, or tissues that are something for the future, or I can buy something, it's all things equal, same price, I'm going to go for the one that's more future forward. So I didn't know if you've had any experience with looking at the large and small. Then I have one more thought.
I think to that point, what is interesting is that what you currently see with those innovative smaller companies, which, for example, have a circular business model, and that was one of the questions also, I think, how can we, how can we finance those? That's currently a challenge, right? Because even if a bank believes in the idea, they don't have the data to do a credit risk estimates for these innovative business models. But the problem here also is that some of the other, non-sustainable products are actually too cheap because we don't price in the externalities. And with the EU taxonomy, we don't have the full solution, but at least we ensure, and Colin didn't explain the EU taxonomy in a lot of detail, but at least it will prevent companies from stating that their products are sustainable if they're actually not. So we'll hope to actually reduce greenwashing a bit, which should then create a bit more of a playing field for innovative and sustainable business models.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And then my final thought is, I think it was maybe a couple months ago, I saw a huge announcement on LinkedIn. Did I read it correctly that PricewaterhouseCoopers is going to be hiring 100,000 coming up here? So I don't know how much of that's related to the SDG reporting, but it sounds like some good careers are like on the move and on the rise.
Yeah, that's part of the new equation strategy that I started out with, Heidi. So you're spot on. We're reshifting our focus and indeed, broadening our scope of work and providing those trust services in the broadest sense of the word. And ESG was one major pillar in that whole realm of things.
Yeah, I just wanted to give my pitch for PwC there and let people.
Employer of choice.
Yeah. So thank you very, very much. This was an incredible session. I know that I personally got a lot out of it, and I believe that, I can see some nodding heads. Some other students look like they might have got some key takeaways. The students will be writing a reflection today, so they'll be thinking about what they gained from this and what they can pull forward. I will be happy to share with you the recording for this, of course, but we want to thank you from the just ever so deeply for being here, and we would have loved to have seen you, of course, in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam or Utrecht, we were ready to go. So I hope then that maybe we can find a way to your offices in the future. But thank you very, very much.
Yeah, you're most welcome. And yeah, hopefully we'll meet again in the future, maybe indeed physically. More than happy to receive you guys over here in the Netherlands.
Well, thank you, Robin. And Tom and Kylan, thank you guys for your time. I know there was a lot of prep going on, and we'll also pass the word here to our your PwC office here in Indy. It's a really important employer for our accounting students, because that's a major route they go as opposed to the consulting side. But I so appreciate your time, and you shared some incredibly great data. So I'm sharing it for Larry personally, but for all the students, this is great.
If you happen to, Larry, if you happen to speak to a partner in Indy called Greg Chester, say hi to him for me.
Okay, because Aaron is one of our partners too, from Aaron Schumpf is a Butler grad. But you said, is it Gary or Greg?
Greg Chester.
Okay,
Yes.
I will. I'll say hi.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe you'll find your way here. We have lots of interesting things going on in Indianapolis, and recently, I don't know if you guys saw this, Indianapolis is becoming a destination city. So
yeah,
I'm inviting you all to come and visit why Indianapolis is becoming a destination city. And Tom, I know some people in dressage, so we can definitely talk.
All right.
All right. So thank you, everyone. Gosh, it's hard. I'm having separation anxiety, so help me out, guys.
Exactly. This is great. It's terrible to have to say bye, but thank you guys again.
Thank you very much.
You guys have a
Thank
good
you
day.
very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Dankjewel. Dankjewel.
Dankjewel.
Gedaan.
Dank u. Dag. Thanks, Tom.